Hello, I'm Mr. Christian. My family lied to keep me from Thanksgiving, and I was the only one left out. But what hurt the most wasn't just the lie. It was the years of manipulation, the betrayal that chipped away at my dignity, my inheritance stolen, and my own flesh and blood turning their backs on me. They thought they could break me, but I'm here to reveal the truth, and it's going to shock you. What happens next will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about family. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the house, the smell of turkey and stuffing greeting me, but it didn't feel like home. The house looked the same, well-worn, comfortable, like it always had. But something was missing. The warmth of it, the feeling that you belong, that was gone. I knew it before I even set foot in the door. I wasn't sure what I expected walking in here. Maybe the feeling that my son had changed his mind, that maybe he'd remember the lessons I taught him, but the coldness that greeted me was thick, like a wall that had been built brick by brick over the years. I wasn't invited, not really. I'd been here, done this, every Thanksgiving for years, but today felt different. I could feel it, deep in my bones, the distance that had grown between us. I was a man who had given up so much for his family, my time, my energy, my dreams. So much of my life had been spent building them up, watching them grow, only to find myself at the edge of their world, ignored and unappreciated. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because that's what fathers do. They give, they sacrifice, and they expect nothing in return. But today, I had had enough. I walked across the threshold, my worn shoes scraping against the familiar wooden floor. I could hear the laughter from the kitchen, the clink of silverware, but I knew better than to believe it was genuine. My son, once my pride, had drifted away. Now he was controlled by his new wife and that man she had brought into our home. They had their lives, and I had mine. We hadn't shared a real conversation in years. As I set my coat down on the chair by the door, I noticed my grandson. He was standing outside, staring in. He looked like he'd been standing there for a while. It didn't take long for the realization to hit me. The chill of the air outside matched the one that had settled into my chest. My grandson was locked out. My heart sank as I saw him shiver in nothing but a thin t-shirt and shorts. I could hear the clinking of the plates inside, and I couldn't understand it. I walked over to the door, knocking lightly, but there was no immediate response. A soft click of the latch unlocked it, and I pushed the door open. My grandson didn't speak. He just stood there, the hurt in his eyes deepening as he looked up at me. "Boy, what are you doing out here?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He didn't answer, just shrugged and kept his head low. I could see the embarrassment in him, the pain he was carrying, for reasons too heavy for his small shoulders. Before I could say anything else, I heard footsteps approaching. My son's voice, distant and distracted, came from the kitchen. He didn't even seem to notice me standing there. He just said, "You know where the kid belongs." "Let him in." I turned to look at him standing there, a half frown on his face, eyes not meeting mine. The stepfather who stood behind him had the same look of indifference. His eyes were cold, calculating, and he seemed to have no concern for my grandson's suffering. I couldn't hold back the words anymore. "You lock my grandson out in the cold while you eat inside. Where's your sense of family? This is how you treat your own blood?" The words hung in the air, but they were ignored, as if nothing had happened. My son didn't even flinch. The stepfather smirked slightly. "You don't understand," my son said, his voice low, dismissive. "It's just Thanksgiving, Dad. The kid will be fine." I took a deep breath, holding back the anger that surged through me. But inside, the rage was building over years of small cuts, each one more painful than the last. The injustice, the lack of respect, all of it. It was too much. My grandson shuffled back inside, and I followed him, the door closing behind me. The warmth of the house hit me immediately, but it didn't comfort me. The turkey on the table looked like a hollow gesture. No one even noticed the quiet tension in the air, the laughter, the small talk. It felt fake, like a performance for an audience that wasn't even watching. My son, now sitting at the head of the table, barely acknowledged me. He didn't even look up. His wife sitting next to him didn't speak a word. The stepfather, he just stared at his plate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible, that I had become nothing more than an afterthought in my own family. But then my grandson looked at me. For a moment, our eyes met, and the pain was clear in his face. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his hurt. It was the same hurt I had felt for years, watching my family slip further and further away. This wasn't the Thanksgiving I had imagined. It wasn't the family I had built, the one I had worked so hard for. No, this was something different, something cold, something broken. And as I sat there, silent, I realized that it wasn't just my grandson who had been locked out. It was me. I took a deep breath, watching the food on the table, watching the empty faces of the people who once meant everything to me. And I knew I couldn't sit here anymore, letting it all fall apart. I had been silent for far too long, and now it was time to show them what family really meant. The dinner table was a war zone of silence. The clatter of plates, the hushed conversations, the subtle glances exchanged over the turkey, it all felt like a farce. As I sat there, I couldn't ignore the growing frustration gnawing at me, the weight of years of sacrifice suddenly feeling like a curse. I had spent decades trying to be the pillar for my family, the one who held it all together, but I wasn't even seen anymore. My son, once my pride and joy, barely spared me a glance. The warmth of family was gone, replaced by a cold indifference I could no longer ignore. As I picked at my plate, the food tasted bland, hollow. It wasn't about the turkey anymore. It wasn't about the tradition of Thanksgiving. It was about the years I had spent building a family, only to watch it crumble from the inside. My son's new life with his wife, and now his stepfather, had grown into a fortress that I could no longer breach. I had tried, Lord knows I had tried, but all my efforts had been met with silence, or worse, indifference. My grandson, the only one left who might have remembered what it meant to be a family, had been locked out in the cold. And what had I done about it? I sat there numb, letting the weight of it all sink in, wondering when I had become a stranger in my own house. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let the silence go on any longer. Why does it feel like I'm invisible here? I thought to myself, looking across the room at my son, who was now engrossed in a conversation with his wife. I had given so much for this family. My time, my labor, my very soul. Where was the respect I had earned? Where was the gratitude for all I had done? It was a question I had been asking myself for years, but today, for the first time, I had an answer. It wasn't coming. Not from my son, not from my daughter-in-law, not from anyone. This Thanksgiving wasn't about family. It wasn't about love or connection. It was a ritual, a performance for an audience that had long stopped paying attention. I could feel the anger rising, bubbling just beneath the surface. The sting of injustice, the ache of being overlooked, it was all too much. But even in the face of it all, I stayed calm. I had learned to keep my emotions in check, to bite my tongue, to let it slide. But not today. Today, something inside me cracked. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of rebellion, of not letting this go, of standing up for myself, of showing them all that I still had a voice. I had been silent for far too long. My grandson's small voice, soft and hesitant, broke through my thoughts. He was standing in the doorway, looking at me, his eyes full of a mixture of fear and longing. I could see the same hurt in him that I had seen in myself all those years ago. He was a child, but he was already learning the harsh lessons of life, the ones that told him he didn't matter, the ones that told him his feelings didn't count. He stepped into the room and our eyes met. For a brief moment, it was just the two of us, the weight of the years pressing down on both of us, the silence between us louder than anything that had been said. Don't let them treat you like this, kid, I whispered, my voice low but firm. This is not how it's supposed to be. He didn't answer. Instead, he just nodded, a silent agreement that spoke volumes. That small moment, that connection, was enough to ignite the fire within me. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not for myself, not for him, not for anyone. I took a deep breath, stood up from the table, and looked across the room at my son. The tension in the air thickened, a quiet storm waiting to erupt. It had been building for years, and now it was time. I've been silent for far too long, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of everything I had kept buried. You will hear my voice today. The room went still. My son looked up, startled. The stepfather, sitting at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. We've been running things around here just fine without your interference, old man, he said, his tone dismissive, as if I were nothing more than a nuisance. The words stung, but they only fueled the fire. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, facing my family. The pain, the frustration, the years of sacrifice, it all came rushing to the surface, but this time, I didn't hold it back. I don't care how you've been running things, I replied, my voice low but sharp. This is my family too, and I won't stand by and watch you destroy it any longer. I could feel the weight of their judgment, but I didn't flinch. This was my moment. I had spent so many years holding everything in, but now I was finally speaking my truth. The room fell silent. My son's eyes widened, the disbelief clear on his face. The stepfather didn't know how to respond. I stood tall, steady, unyielding. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power, a sense of control. I turned away from them, walking out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind. As I stepped out into the cold air, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. I was done being silent, done being ignored, done being overlooked. I wasn't just walking away from that house. I was walking into something new, a fight for my family, a fight for my legacy, a fight for respect. No one gets to define us, not anymore, I said under my breath, more to myself than anyone else. And just like that, I made my decision. This was only the beginning. It had been a week since Thanksgiving, and the weight of everything was still heavy on me. I couldn't shake the image of my grandson, locked outside, shivering in the cold while the rest of us feasted. The more I replayed it in my mind, the angrier I became. And as much as I hated to admit it, the anger was directed mostly at myself. I had been silent for too long, and the silence had allowed this, to let them treat me and my family like this. I sat in my living room, the place where I'd spent countless hours raising my children, laughing with my wife, and watching them grow. Now it was just me, alone with my thoughts. My son hadn't called since the Thanksgiving blow-up. I hadn't expected him to, but the silence between us spoke volumes. My mind kept coming back to that night, to his face as I confronted him, his dismissal, his refusal to acknowledge the pain I was in. It was the final straw. I was done being ignored. I was done being the invisible man in my own life. I needed to confront him. I needed to stand my ground and make sure he understood how deep the hurt ran. For too long, I had let the family make decisions without me, without acknowledging my place, my sacrifices. Today, that stopped. As I paced the living room, the anger grew, but so did something else, clarity. I was no longer the passive father, the one who always kept quiet. I was the man who had raised them, who had built a life for them, and now it was time to reclaim my voice. I grabbed my coat and walked out the door. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I was about to do, but I knew I couldn't keep going the way I had been. The time for silence was over. The confrontation was inevitable. As I stood outside my son's house, my heart beat faster with each step I took toward the door. My hands were cold, not just from the winter chill, but from the weight of everything that had built up inside me over the years. I knocked on the door. The sound of my knuckles against the wood echoed like a warning. When the door swung open, my son stood there looking at me with that familiar distant gaze. He had grown taller, broader, but his eyes were the same, empty, as though he was seeing a ghost. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. Maybe he didn't know how to handle this, or maybe he just didn't care. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his tone flat. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The house was quiet, too quiet. The same house that had once been full of laughter, of memories. Now it felt like a tomb. My son followed me into the living room, his footsteps heavy behind me. "I've been thinking," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I was seething. "About everything. About what happened on Thanksgiving and everything that's led up to it." He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "Dad, you're overreacting. It was just a misunderstanding. You're always like this." The words hit me like a slap in the face. "Overreacting," he said. Like what had happened didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. I clenched my fists, but I refused to let the anger get the best of me. "No," I said, my voice low but firm. "For years I've watched you all tear this family apart, and today it ends. I won't be silenced anymore." He shook his head, scoffing. "Dad, you've always been like this. Nothing's changed." I could feel the walls around me closing in, but I didn't back down. "You're wrong. You've never understood. You've always dismissed me. But not anymore." His eyes narrowed, clearly annoyed. But this wasn't about him. This was about me reclaiming what was mine. I wasn't just a silent observer anymore. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension in the room. "I know about the money, the transfers, the way you've kept me out of everything. The way you've tried to erase me from my own life." For the first time, he looked genuinely taken aback. "You think I don't know?" I pressed. "How you and the stepfather have been conspiring behind my back. You thought you could push me aside and take control of everything, but not anymore." The look on his face shifted. The cockiness faded, replaced by something closer to guilt or fear. But instead of admitting anything, he tried to deflect. "You're just making things worse," he said, his voice shaking now. "This isn't the time or place." But it was the right time. It had always been the right time. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it anymore. I stood tall, letting the words settle in the air like a heavy fog. "I've lived my life for everyone else, but now it's my turn. And this time, I'm not backing down." As the silence stretched on, I could feel the weight of my decision. I had crossed a line, but I was done being silent. I had fought my whole life for them, for this family, but it was clear now that no one had fought for me. When I turned to leave, I saw him, my grandson, standing in the doorway, watching us. There was a look in his eyes, a silent plea, a question without words. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone who understood. I walked toward him, and as I reached the door, I stopped. I placed a hand on his shoulder, looked him in the eye, and said, "No one gets to define us. Not anymore." And with that, I walked out the door, not just from the house, but from the life I had known. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking toward something new. A fight for respect, a fight for my family. And this time, I was ready. The house felt different now. Where it used to be a place of laughter and warmth, it was now cold, like a shadow of what it once was. I hadn't stepped through the door in weeks, and with each step I took inside, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The silence that followed me through the doorway was thicker than any winter air I'd ever known. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the room. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of connection. My children, my own flesh and blood, seemed like strangers. They sat around the table, quietly eating their meal, but there was no warmth in their eyes. No recognition of the years I'd spent raising them, protecting them. Now they were nothing more than silent bystanders in the drama I'd been cast in. The stepfather, always the outsider in my eyes, stood off to the side, watching everything unfold without a word. It was as if the whole family had picked sides, and I was no longer on theirs. I didn't need to look at them to know what was going through their minds. The coldness, the judgment, the refusal to face the truth, it was all there, in the way they avoided eye contact, in the way they pretended not to hear the words that were about to come from my mouth. But I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I couldn't let this go on. The thought of my grandson locked outside, of the emotional distance between me and my own son, it ate at me. For so long, I had held everything in, hoping things would change, hoping they'd come to their senses. But nothing had changed. They didn't hear me, they didn't see me. And now I could feel the rage building inside, a quiet storm threatening to break free. I turned to my son, who was sitting at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on his plate. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'm talking to you now, not to fight, but to end the hurt that's been festering in this family for too long." His eyes flickered up to meet mine, but there was no real recognition there, just a coldness that mirrored the room around us. "You're overreacting, Dad," he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "You've always been like this. Nothing's changed." I felt a lump rise in my throat, the words burning in my chest, but I swallowed it down. For years, I'd kept my feelings to myself, hoping things would get better on their own. But now, I could see it. Everything that had been buried was coming to the surface, and it was time to confront it. "Why do you always act like I'm the problem?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but there was a steel edge to it. "I've spent my life building this family, trying to hold it together. And you," I pointed at him, my finger trembling slightly, "you've torn it apart. But I'm done being ignored. I won't stay silent anymore." My son opened his mouth, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. I couldn't. "I know what you've done," I continued, the words coming faster now. "I know about the money, about how you've kept me out of everything, how you've erased me from this family's legacy." The shock was evident in his eyes now. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to deflect. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice wavering just a bit. "We've been fine without you." But I wasn't finished. Not this time. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, stepping closer to him. "I know how you've taken what's mine, how you've manipulated everything to fit your agenda, but not anymore." The room was silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. I could see the stepfather's face tighten, his jaw clenching as he stood from the table. He'd been lurking in the background, always just out of reach, but now I could see his true colors. "You've been nothing but a ghost in this house," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You've treated me like I'm invisible, erased my name from everything that matters. But that ends today." His eyes flared with anger, but he didn't move. Instead, he tried to keep his composure, to maintain the control he thought he had. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. "This was never your fight. You've lost your place in this family. You always have." But that didn't scare me. It didn't even make me flinch. I stood there looking at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power I hadn't known in years. They thought they could push me aside. They thought I'd just accept being treated like this. I wasn't going to let it happen anymore. The room erupted into chaos. My children began to argue, some defending me, others questioning my actions. The stepfather was trying to maintain control, but it was slipping through his fingers. The foundation of everything he'd built was crumbling right in front of him. I heard my daughter's voice, tinged with guilt and confusion. "Dad, why didn't you say something sooner? Why didn't you tell us what was really happening?" I turned to her, my heart heavy. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't think you'd believe me." The stepfather's face reddened, his patience wearing thin. You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? You've lost your place in this family. I didn't fight for all these years to be pushed aside, I said, my voice firm. If it means losing everything, so be it. But I won't let you do this anymore. The tension in the room was unbearable, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever again. As the arguments continued, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. I had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. The stepfather's last-ditch effort to regain control failed, and as I turned to leave, I could hear him one last time. You want to destroy everything? Fine, but remember, I hold all the cards now. You'll regret this. The words stung, but they didn't scare me. I was already walking away, already moving on to a new chapter, a chapter where I wouldn't be silenced, a chapter where I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. As I left that house, I didn't know if I'd ever be able to return, but I knew one thing. I would never be the same. The silence in my house was deafening. After the storm that had passed through my family, after the confrontation that left me raw and exposed, I found myself alone in the quiet. The walls that had once echoed with laughter and voices now stood mute. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where the light used to come through in the early mornings. But now it only reminded me of how long I'd been sitting here, waiting, reflecting. I wasn't sure what was worse, the confrontation or the fact that my family had grown comfortable with the silence. A lifetime of being the one to hold things together, and here I was, left in the cold. I thought about the words I had spoken, the anger that had boiled over. I hadn't meant to let it all spill out, but it was too late to take back. The walls I had built over the years, brick by brick, had come tumbling down. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had gone too far. Was it worth it? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had been silent for too long, swallowing the hurt, pretending everything would get better. But nothing had changed. And nothing would if I didn't do something about it now. It's been a lifetime of silence, of swallowing the hurt. But today, I break it. No more, I whispered to myself, gripping the armrests as if they could steady me. There was no turning back. Not this time. I wasn't fighting for the past anymore. I had to fight for the future, for my grandson, for what was rightfully mine. The anger that had simmered for so long now turned into something else, something far stronger, a drive for justice. It wasn't just about standing up for myself anymore. It was about securing a future where I wouldn't be ignored, where my family wouldn't be lost to their own dysfunction. I'm tired of fighting for the past. Now I fight for the future, I muttered under my breath. The words echoed in the emptiness of the room. I was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the confrontation, I knew I had to take action. No more talking, no more silent suffering. I needed help, and I needed it fast. The lawyer's office felt strange to me, but it was the only option left. I stepped through the door, the air inside cool and impersonal. It felt like I was walking into a world I didn't quite belong to, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I had no choice. The lawyer's office was clean, polished, everything I wasn't used to. I was a man who had always taken care of things himself, but not this time. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about protecting what was mine. I don't need permission to stand up for myself. This is my fight, my legacy, I said, trying to sound confident, even though my hands were shaking. It didn't matter. I couldn't afford to be afraid now. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a serious demeanor, sat across from me, flipping through some papers. It's time to stop being silent. Let's make this count, he said, looking me in the eye. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone. The next challenge was my family. I wasn't sure if they'd stand with me, but I couldn't do this alone. I arranged a family meeting, hoping to get them on my side, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. They had lived under the illusion of normalcy for too long. The stepfather had kept his grip on them. and some of my children, especially the younger ones, were too loyal to see the truth. "I'm not doing this for me," I said to the room full of skeptical faces. "I'm doing this for us, for everything we've lost, for everything we're about to gain." The words hung in the air, and I could see some of them softening. Others, though, stayed frozen in their doubt. My son, in particular, looked away, his jaw tight. He didn't want to hear it. "You're throwing everything away, Dad. This isn't the way," he said, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. But I stood firm. I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The world had taken enough from me, from us. It was time for me to take back what was rightfully mine. The tension in the room mounted as I laid out my plans. I had my legal rights now. I had the proof. But there was still the question of whether my family would stand by me when the battle turned real. I wasn't naive. I knew some of them would back the stepfather, afraid of the fallout. But the fight wasn't just about me. It was about what kind of family we would be in the future. The lies and manipulation had gone on long enough. Now the reckoning was coming. And then, as if everything shifted in an instant, my daughter spoke up. "We've been living in a lie. It's time we stand with you," she said, her voice soft but resolute. Her words were like a breath of fresh air. Maybe there was hope. Maybe we could fix this. But not everyone was ready to face the truth. Some of my children were still loyal to the stepfather, still too afraid to see the damage that had been done. The family was divided, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. But I knew it was the price I had to pay. The stepfather had no intention of letting go. He knew his control over this family was slipping, and he wasn't going to let me take it back without a fight. His words were laced with venom as he tried to manipulate the situation, using fear and threats to keep me from moving forward. "You think you can beat me? You're making a huge mistake," he said, his voice low and menacing. I stood tall, unshaken. "I may have been silent for too long, but I'm no fool. This is the last time you'll ever take anything from me." The final showdown was closing in. Tomorrow, I would stand before the court, my life laid bare. The stakes had never been higher, and I knew it. But I wasn't turning back. It was too late to go back now. But I'll go forward no matter the cost. Tomorrow will either break me or free me. But no matter what, it's the last battle I'll ever fight in silence. The morning before the trial, the air in the house felt heavier than usual. The walls, once a sanctuary of family memories, seemed to be closing in on me. I sat in my chair staring at the pile of legal documents in front of me, papers that represented my life, my fight, and everything that had been taken from me. Each document was a reminder of the weight of this moment. For years, I had carried the burden of silence, watching as my family fractured. But now, I was about to take back what was mine. My hands were steady as I sorted through the papers, but my mind raced. There were still doubts gnawing at me, lingering in the back of my mind. What if I lost? What if this had all been for nothing? But then I thought about my grandson, the only person left who still looked at me with trust, with respect. This wasn't just for me. It was for him, for his future. "They can't take what's mine. Not anymore," I muttered to myself. There was no turning back now. I was ready. I had to be. The house felt colder than ever as I walked into the kitchen, where the rest of the family sat, their faces filled with uncertainty. The ones who stood by me were few, but their presence gave me strength. The rest? Well, they had made their choice. I couldn't afford to worry about them. They can stand with him, or they can stand with me. Either way, I'm moving forward, I said, my voice low but firm. It was time to take the next step. The courthouse was a stark contrast to the warmth of my home. The cold, sterile air inside the courtroom pressed against me as I walked to the front. It was a place I never thought I'd find myself, standing on trial for something that should have never needed defending. The injustice of it all settled heavily in my chest, but I was determined. I felt the tension in the air as I glanced at the stepfather and his lawyer. They sat across from me, their faces twisted in smug confidence, but I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. This isn't just a case, I thought to myself. This is my life. I had spent so many years silently accepting the role they had forced on me, but today was different. Today, I was standing up for myself, for my family, for everything they had tried to take from me. The stepfather's lawyer wasted no time in attempting to discredit me. He twisted words, threw out accusations, and tried to paint me as the villain. But I wasn't a fool. I kept my cool, my eyes locked on the judge, and I let the words roll off me. If they think I'm scared, they've never known me, I thought. I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. The courtroom was tense as the truth began to unfold. I stood, my voice unwavering as I spoke the truth about the years of mistreatment, about the sacrifices I had made for a family that had turned its back on me. The stepfather had manipulated everyone, pushed me aside, and erased me from every important decision. As I spoke, I could see the shift in the room. The family members who had been loyal to the stepfather were beginning to realize the gravity of what had been happening behind their backs. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with anger. It didn't matter. I had to do this. I've been quiet for too long, but not anymore. This is my truth, I said, my voice echoing in the silence of the courtroom. It was a bitter release, but it felt right. I could see the shock in their eyes. They had no idea how deep the lies ran. But now they knew. Now the truth was out. But the stepfather wasn't done. He wasn't about to let go of his control without a fight. He threw out a final accusation, one that he hoped would destroy me. He tried to make me out to be a man who had nothing left to stand on, a liar who didn't deserve his family. The words hit hard, sharper than I expected. For a moment I was taken aback, but only for a moment. I wasn't about to let him break me. Not after everything I'd fought for. You can try to break me, but you'll never silence me again, I said, my voice steady, my heart resolute. The room fell into silence, but I knew this was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. In the final moments of the trial, I laid out the evidence, everything I had painstakingly gathered over the years. The lies the stepfather had told, the manipulation, the stolen assets, all of it came to light. And with each piece of evidence, his hold on the family began to slip away. The judge listened intently, the weight of the truth settling in. The family sat in stunned silence as I laid it all bare. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of triumph. The battle was hard, but I had won. It's over. The truth has won, I thought, the relief washing over me like a wave. But even as I said those words to myself, I knew the journey was far from over. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The fight had ended, but the emotional toll remained. I stood outside, taking a deep breath, looking out at the city around me. The future was still uncertain, and I didn't know what was next. But I did know this. I had fought for what was mine, and I wasn't about to let anything or anyone take it from me again. I've fought for this, and now it's over. But the road ahead will be just as hard. I can only hope it's worth it, I said to myself, looking toward the unknown. The night after the court session, I sat in my old recliner, the weight of everything pressing against my chest. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, thinking about what came next. The tension of the trial still hung in the air like smoke, suffocating any sense of peace I used to know. I stared out the window, the lights of the city flickering in the distance, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. The phone rang, shattering the silence. I picked it up without thinking, and sure enough, it was family, calling with mixed words, mixed feelings. Some were angry, some were apologizing, some didn't even know what to say. They were torn, and I could feel it in every syllable. I thought blood was thicker than water. I thought family would fight for me, but now I'm not so sure. My mind drifted back to the moment in the courtroom. I had stood tall, spoken my truth, and yet the victory felt hollow. Sure, I had exposed the lies, the betrayal, but what did it matter if my own flesh and blood stood divided? The cost of it all was starting to hit me. It was no longer about justice or pride. It was about the price of standing up. I questioned whether it was all worth it, fighting for the respect of a family that couldn't even stand together. The next day, I gathered with my family at one of our usual get-togethers. The house felt cold. The laughter that used to fill the air now seemed distant, replaced with uneasy silence. People moved around, pretending to ignore the cracks in the foundation. But they were there, deep and obvious. I could feel it, like a weight hanging over all of us. The division was clear. Some of my children, the ones who had always been closest to me, were now standing beside me. Others, my youngest, still stood by the stepfather, refusing to see the truth. They were loyal to the lies, loyal to the man who had kept them in the dark. I saw my daughter across the room, her eyes avoiding mine. The shame was in her eyes, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. And the others, my son included, he looked at me like I was the enemy. The silence was deafening. No one spoke, but we all knew where we stood. Some of us, on opposite sides of the battle. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about what it cost me to get here. And as I stood there, watching my family split down the middle, I knew some relationships were beyond repair. No matter how hard I fought, some of them were gone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the harsh glow of the overhead light casting long shadows across the room. My hand hovered over the blank sheet of paper. I hadn't written anything for years. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had something to say. I picked up the pen and started writing. It wasn't a letter to the court, or to anyone else for that matter. It was for me, my manifesto, my last stand. I wrote about everything they had taken from me, my dignity, my role in my own family, the respect I had worked so hard to earn. I wrote about how they had stolen my voice, but no more. They wouldn't silence me again. They've stolen everything from me, but they'll never take my voice again, I wrote, the words raw and sharp as they left my pen. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but it didn't matter. This was for me. A final act of defiance, a reclaiming of the power I had forgotten I had. When the family got my letter, it didn't take long for the reactions to come. Some were confused, some were furious. The arguments started almost immediately. "I can't believe he did this," my son muttered under his breath. I could hear the disbelief in his voice, and it stung. My daughter was in tears, feeling guilty for the way things had unfolded. But there was anger in her too, anger at me for speaking out when she thought I should stay quiet. But I didn't care about their anger anymore. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," I had written. "I'm telling you who I am." That letter was more than words on paper. It was a declaration that I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I wasn't going to hide in the shadows of my own family. This was who I was now. I couldn't take it back, and I wouldn't. Then came the stepfather's counterattack. As if the courtroom wasn't enough, he decided to take it public, using the media to drag my name through the dirt. He spread rumors, tried to paint me as unfit, unstable. He thought if he could turn the world against me, he would regain control. For a second, it hit me hard. The smear, the lies. It was a public attack. Everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, being dragged into the mud. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. The man I had once been, timid, silent, was gone. "You think you can take everything from me?" I said aloud to no one in particular. "I've already lost it all." That was the truth, and it freed me. Instead of letting the smear break me, it fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everything that had been stolen, for my dignity, and for the legacy I would leave behind. The courtroom became my battlefield once again. I stood before the judge, the weight of the evidence in my hands. The lies the stepfather had spread were now laid bare, and the truth, irrefutable, began to sink in. I spoke the truth, not just for me, but for my grandson, for the future that I still hoped for. The courtroom was silent as I laid out the final pieces of the puzzle. documents, testimonies. Everything was in place. The stepfather's facade cracked, and for the first time in a long time I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Victory. The truth is the one thing you can't take from me, I said, my voice steady. The tide had turned in my favor, but it wasn't over. Not yet. When the court session ended for the day, I stepped out into the fresh air. The weight on my shoulders had lifted, but I was far from free. I had won, but what now? What did this victory mean when the future still looked uncertain? I walked down the courthouse steps, the weight of everything still lingering. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't fear. It was the realization that this battle, this fight, was only just beginning. This fight is only just beginning, I whispered to myself, knowing the road ahead was long, but I was ready. The day had arrived. The courtroom was filled with a heavy tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. I sat in the waiting room, my thoughts louder than anything around me. The battle that had taken so much from me, the years of silence and sacrifice, was now at its peak. The stakes had never been higher, and the weight of what was about to unfold pressed on my chest like an anchor. The phone had rung several times this morning. Family members offering their opinions, their doubts. Some wanted to offer support, others asked if I was sure this was the right path. But it didn't matter. The decision had been made long before I walked into that room. I had come to understand that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for my dignity, for my place in this family, for my grandson's future. The question wasn't whether I would win. It was what I had to lose in the process. As I sat there, the memories of everything that led me here flooded back. The hurt. The years of being overlooked, ignored, and then betrayed. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. At the end of it all, what's left? A family broken, a name tarnished, or a chance at redemption? I had to make peace with that thought. The journey had been long, and maybe there was no going back. The stepfather, once so confident in his manipulation, now sat across from me in the courtroom, his demeanor changing by the hour. I knew this would be the final confrontation. The lies that had been spun, the control he thought he had over everything. Today, that was all about to be undone. I prepared my final defense. This wasn't about evidence alone. It was about speaking the truth, the emotional truth that no one could deny. I wasn't fighting for approval anymore, nor recognition. I was fighting for what was right. I had to. You may have convinced them, but not me. This ends now. Those words carried more weight than I ever imagined. I was done letting someone else write my story. My dignity, my life, would no longer be up for negotiation. The moment of reckoning arrived. As the judge turned his attention to me, I laid out my evidence. One by one, the documents, the recordings, the testimonies, everything came together, exposing the lies for what they were. I watched as the stepfather's calm facade cracked, his confidence dissolving as the truth took center stage. I didn't care about his reaction anymore. For once the truth was out, and there was no escaping it. The truth always has a way of coming out, and today, it's coming out with a vengeance. The room was still, everyone's attention riveted on the unfolding story. For me, this wasn't just about winning a case, it was about showing everyone, including myself, that I would no longer be invisible. I had spent too long in silence, enduring the shadows. Now I was stepping into the light, and there was no turning back. Then came my final testimony. There was no script, no rehearsed speech. This was me, raw and real. I had lived this pain, this humiliation. It was my turn to speak. I may not have always been perfect, but I have always been real, and I won't let anyone take that from me. I spoke with every ounce of strength in me, each word a weight I had carried for years. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final judgment, but I knew I had already won. Not because of the verdict, but because I had reclaimed myself. The judge announced the verdict. I had won. But as the words echoed in my ears, something inside me felt heavy. The victory felt distant, hollow. The emotional cost was steep. There was no celebration, no joy. It was a bitter reminder that I had lost more than I ever wanted to. My family, the people who should have been there for me, were now forever changed. The relationships that I had tried to protect, tried to hold together, were broken beyond repair. This victory doesn't feel like a win. It feels like the end of something I didn't even know I had left. It hit me then. This wasn't just about the courtroom. This was about a future I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to rebuild. A family I had spent my life trying to hold together, now torn apart. As I stepped out of the courtroom, the phone buzzed in my pocket. My children calling to offer apologies, to talk. But it didn't matter. The silence that had settled in between us was too loud for words. Some apologized, others said nothing. The gap between us was growing, and I knew some things could never be fixed. Maybe some things can never be healed. But I'll be all right. I'm still standing. It was time to move forward, alone if I had to. The future had to be about my grandson now. Everything else was secondary. I looked at my grandson later that evening. He was the one constant in all this. The one thing that hadn't changed. We didn't speak much, but that was fine. He didn't need to say anything. We understood each other perfectly. The road ahead wasn't easy, but we would walk it together. This fight is over, but my story's just beginning. I walked into the future with a heart full of questions, uncertainties, and scars. But there was one thing I knew for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The courtroom had fallen silent after the verdict. The battle had been long, but it was over now. My heart still felt heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The truth was out. I had fought for what was right. But as the final decision was handed down, I found myself questioning everything once again. The family had gathered for the last confrontation. We were in a small meeting room, the same place where everything had started to fall apart, the same place where so many lies had been spoken, so much damage had been done. This was it, the final step. But something had changed inside me. I walked in, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for peace. I had already fought. The battle had been won in the courtroom. Now it was time to face the family. As I stood there looking at my children, some of them with regret in their eyes, some fearful of facing the truth, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped before. I wasn't the man I used to be. What's been done is done. We can't go back, but we can move forward, I said quietly. I wasn't here for revenge. I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to find some kind of resolution. The stepfather wasn't there, but his absence spoke volumes. I looked at my family and began to speak, not with anger, but with the calm strength that had carried me through everything. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask for understanding, I said. What we've lost cannot be regained, but what's left, what we still have, is worth fighting for. And that's when I knew that this moment was not about finding closure. It was about the possibility of rebuilding, starting fresh, not with the past, but with the future. The air in the room was thick with emotion. My eldest son stood up, his voice trembling as he spoke. I can't change what's been done, but I can change what I do from here on out. His words weren't a cure-all. They didn't fix everything, but they were a start, a real start, the first crack in the wall that had divided us. And in that moment, I felt a shift, something heavy and powerful lifting from my chest. The room was quiet for a long while. People were thinking, processing. For the first time in years, there was hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that fixes everything instantly, but it was the kind of hope that makes healing possible. I forgive you, I said, my voice strong but steady. But I'll never forget what was done. That's how I can heal. Forgiveness wasn't a magic word. It wasn't going to erase the past, but it was a choice. A choice I had to make for my own peace. And in that moment, It felt like I had taken the first step toward truly healing. As the meeting came to a close, I looked at my family. And the road ahead wouldn't be easy. We had too much to fix, too much to rebuild. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. I walked out of that room with my grandson by my side. We didn't speak much as we left, but we didn't need to. He had stood by me through everything. They couldn't break me. They just gave me more strength. I knew the path forward wasn't going to be smooth. There would still be bumps, cracks, and moments of doubt. But I wasn't alone anymore. And I had my dignity, my legacy, and a future to fight for. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was ready to live. We sat together that evening, on the porch, watching the sun sink low in the sky. The air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The world had tried to break me, to strip away everything I held dear. But here I was, still standing, still strong, and my grandson, he was the one thing that had never wavered. He was my hope now. No matter what happens from here, I know my worth, and I'll pass that on to you, I told him, looking him in the eyes. And as the sun set, I realized that this was my legacy. Not the fight, not the pain, but the quiet strength that had carried me through it all. The road ahead wasn't clear. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing. The fight was over. And the real work, the real journey, had just begun. It's not about where we've been, but where we're going. And I'm going forward, I said, taking his hand as we walked together, stepping into the future,